Most people think they're bad with money. They think they spend too much, save too little, and somehow missed a class everyone else took. They look at their bank account, feel that familiar knot in their stomach, and immediately blame themselves. If I were more disciplined, if I were smarter, if I just tried harder. But if you zoom out for a moment, something doesn't add up. Millions of people wake up every day, go to work, pay their bills, try to be responsible, and still feel stuck. Same stress, same anxiety, same paycheck to paycheck cycle year after year. If this were just about bad decisions, the numbers wouldn't look like this. Because the truth is, most people aren't failing at money. They're operating inside a system that quietly drains them while convincing them it's their fault. Think about how the cycle actually works. Your paycheck arrives. For a brief moment, you feel relief. Not excitement, relief. Then, almost immediately, the money starts disappearing before you even touch it. Rent takes its cut. Utilities take theirs, insurance, phone bills, internet, subscriptions you forgot you signed up for years ago. By the time you check what's left, the month hasn't even started yet. This is an important moment because this is where most people internalize the wrong lesson. They don't think the system is expensive. They think, I messed up again. And that's exactly what the system relies on. You're told you should budget harder, that you should skip small pleasures, that if you just made better choices, you'd be fine. So you blame yourself. But notice something important. Even when people cut spending, even when they're careful, the pressure doesn't go away. That's because the biggest expenses in modern life are not optional. You can't discipline your way out of rent. You can't budget hack healthcare. You can't coupon your way around insurance, transportation, or childcare. These costs don't respond to motivation. They respond to the market. And here's where the system tightens. Wages move slowly. Prices don't. Every year, life gets a little more expensive. Housing, food, transportation, insurance, all creeping upward. But your paycheck doesn't automatically rise with them. So even when you do everything right, you're running uphill on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. At first, you don't notice. The increases are small. A little more for rent. A little more at the grocery store. A little more for gas. But over time, those small increases compound. And when the gap between what you earn and what life costs becomes too wide, the system offers you a solution. Credit. Credit doesn't show up as a villain, it shows up as relief. It smooths the gap. It lets you keep moving without collapsing. Credit cards don't say, you can't afford this. They say, you don't have to decide right now. Minimum payments make the pain feel small. Interest makes the problem permanent. Buy now, pay later works the same way. Present you gets comfort, future you gets the bill. And when future you finally feels overwhelmed, the advice repeats. Just try harder, be more disciplined, start next month. The system never asks why the gap exists in the first place. It just profits from you trying to survive it. Banks profit when you carry balances. Companies profit when prices rise faster than wages. Entire industries are built around you feeling just okay enough to keep going, but never comfortable enough to stop. And here's the most dangerous part. The system feels normal. Everyone around you is dealing with the same stress, so it feels like a personal issue instead of a structural one. You don't feel robbed, you feel inadequate. But the math tells a different story. If your income stays mostly flat while costs rise year after year, the outcome is already decided. No amount of willpower fixes a gap that keeps widening. That's why so many people feel like they're working harder but getting nowhere. Effort alone can't overcome a system that quietly taxes you through time, inflation, and debt. Inflation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send a notification. It just makes everything slightly more expensive every year. Your money doesn't disappear, it just buys less. That's why people feel confused. They did the responsible thing, they avoided risk, they played it safe, and yet they're worse off. This creates a powerful psychological trap. Visible losses feel dangerous. Invisible losses feel safe. Watching an investment go down triggers fear. Watching cash sit still feels comforting, but both can lead to the same outcome. The difference is whether you can see the damage happening. The system exploits that fear. It trains you to avoid visible volatility while quietly accepting guaranteed decline. And because the decline is slow, most people don't notice until years have passed. That's why shame is such an effective tool. If people blame the system, they would demand change. If they blame themselves, they just try harder inside the same rules. This doesn't mean you're powerless, but it does mean the solution isn't perfection. The first step out of the trap is understanding it. Understanding that money today isn't just about how much you earn, but how fast your expenses grow. Understanding that stability on paper can hide real losses. Understanding that playing it safe often means standing still while the world moves past you. Once you see that, your decisions change. You stop chasing discipline as the solution to everything. You stop thinking in terms of guilt and start thinking in terms of leverage. Leverage looks boring. It looks slow. It looks unexciting compared to quick fixes. But leverage is how you step off the treadmill. Leverage is reducing fixed expenses where possible, using credit strategically instead of emotionally, building systems that work even when motivation is low. It's understanding that money is not a moral test. It's a tool inside an environment. And that environment matters. The system relies on people never connecting these dots. Because once you do, the illusion breaks. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What game am I actually playing?" That question alone changes everything. You realize you were never bad with money. You were just surviving inside a system that profits from keeping you busy, stressed, and blaming yourself. And the moment you stop internalizing that blame, you start thinking clearly again. That's where real progress begins. And here's where progress actually starts to matter. Because once people understand they're not broken, once they see the system clearly, the next question is always the same. Okay, so what do I do now? This is where most financial content either becomes unrealistic or starts yelling at you. I'm not going to do that. Progress does not come from flipping your life upside down. It comes from changing the direction of small decisions and letting time work for you instead of against you. The biggest mistake people make after having this realization is trying to fix everything at once. They overhaul their budget. They cut everything that brings joy. They promise themselves they'll never use credit again. That usually lasts about 2 weeks. Then life happens. Real progress looks much quieter than motivation videos make it seem. It starts with understanding where the pressure actually comes from. Most people think they're stuck because they don't make enough money. Sometimes that's true. But more often they're stuck because their fixed expenses are too high relative to their income. Fixed expenses are the costs that don't care how motivated you are. Rent, car payments, insurance, debt minimums. These are the expenses that show up every month, whether you're having a good week or a bad one. When fixed expenses take up too much of your income, everything else becomes stressful. Saving feels impossible. Unexpected costs feel catastrophic, and credit becomes the only way to breathe. So, progress doesn't start with cutting coffee. It starts with slowly lowering the percentage of your income that is already spoken for before the month even begins. That might mean downsizing later than you wanted, driving a less exciting car than you could technically afford, saying no to upgrades that feel harmless but lock in higher monthly obligations. None of this is glamorous, but it creates space. And space is what breaks the cycle. Another part of progress is changing how you use credit. Credit is not evil, but emotional credit use is. Using credit to smooth cash flow for planned expenses is very different from using credit to relieve stress. One is strategic, the other is survival. Progress means you stop asking, "Can I make the payment?" and start asking, "Is this increasing or reducing pressure on my future self?" That single question changes behavior more than any rule. And then there's time. Time is the most misunderstood part of money. Most people expect progress to feel fast, but systems don't reverse quickly. If it took years to feel stuck, it takes time to feel free again. The problem is that early progress is invisible. Balances move slowly. Stress doesn't disappear overnight. Life doesn't suddenly feel easy, so people quit right before momentum kicks in. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Small improvements, applied consistently, eventually change the math. And once the math changes, everything else gets easier. Now, quick pause here. If this is making sense so far, if you're realizing that this isn't about being bad with money, but about understanding the environment you're in, this channel is going to go deep into this stuff. We're going to talk about systems, pressure, leverage, and how normal people actually make progress without pretending life is simple. So, if you want more videos like this, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think, and it lets me know to keep making these. All right, back to it. One of the most important mindset shifts people need to make is separating control from responsibility. You are responsible for your decisions, but you are not in control of the entire system. When people confuse those two, they burn out. They take full emotional responsibility for outcomes that were never fully under their control. Rising costs, stagnant wages, economic shifts. That doesn't mean you give up. It means you stop wasting energy on shame. Progress happens when you focus on the levers you can move. Your spending structure, your debt strategy, your savings buffer, your long-term investing behavior, not all at once, one at a time. And here's something almost no one tells you. Progress feels boring before it feels empowering. At first, it just feels like saying no more often, like being slightly less comfortable, like moving slower than everyone else. But then something subtle happens. Bills stop feeling as scary. Unexpected expenses stop feeling like emergencies. You start sleeping better. And that's when you realize you're no longer in survival mode. You're not winning the system yet, but you're no longer losing to it either. That's the turning point. From there, things compound quietly. Less stress leads to better decisions. Better decisions lead to more flexibility. More flexibility leads to leverage. And leverage is how you eventually stop feeling trapped. Before we wrap this up, I want to slow things down for a moment, because a lot of information can pass through your ears and still not fully land unless you pause and connect the dots. So let's talk about what we actually learned today. The first and most important thing is this: you are not bad with money. That idea is incredibly powerful because most people have been carrying the opposite belief for years. They think their stress is proof of failure. They think their anxiety means they're irresponsible. But what we saw today is that feeling stuck is often the logical outcome of the environment you're in, not a personal flaw. You can do everything right on the surface and still feel like you're barely staying afloat. That alone should change how you talk to yourself. The second thing we learned is how the system actually creates that feeling. It's not one big dramatic event. It's not a sudden collapse. It's small pressure applied consistently. Your paycheck arrives, and before you even make a decision, most of it is already gone. Not because you failed, but because modern life is built around high fixed costs. Rent, transportation, insurance, debt minimums. These are expenses that don't care how disciplined you are. And when those fixed costs take up too much of your income, everything else becomes stressful. Saving feels impossible. Unexpected expenses feel like emergencies. And credit becomes a coping mechanism instead of a tool. Which leads to the third thing we learned. Credit doesn't solve the problem, it hides it. Credit makes the gap between income and expenses feel manageable in the moment, but it doesn't close that gap. It just pushes the consequences forward. Minimum payments make stress feel smaller today. Interest makes it bigger tomorrow. Buy now, pay later feels harmless. Until future, you has to juggle multiple past decisions at once. None of this happens because people are reckless. It happens because the system is designed to keep people moving, not resting. The fourth thing we learned is about visibility. Visible losses feel dangerous. Invisible losses feel safe. That's why people are trained to fear market ups and downs, but feel comforted by a savings balance that doesn't change. But standing still while costs rise is not safety. It's slow decline. And the system benefits from that misunderstanding. Because when losses are invisible, people don't react. They don't ask questions, so they don't change direction. They just blame themselves and try harder inside the same rules. Which brings us to the fifth and maybe most important idea. Progress does not come from shame. Shame keeps you frozen. Shame makes you think the solution is perfection. But money isn't a moral test. It's a tool inside an environment, and environments matter. Once you understand that, progress becomes quieter, calmer, and more sustainable. Progress isn't about cutting every joy out of your life. It's about reducing pressure where it actually comes from, lowering fixed expenses when possible, using credit strategically instead of emotionally, building buffers so unexpected costs don't become crises. It's about consistency, not intensity. Small changes applied steadily eventually change the math. And when the math changes, your experience of life changes with it. Another thing we learned today is that early progress is often invisible. Balances don't skyrocket. Stress doesn't vanish overnight. At first, it just feels like fewer emergencies, slightly better sleep, less panic when something goes wrong. But those are not small wins. Those are signs that you're stepping out of survival mode. And survival mode is where the system wants people to stay. Because people in survival mode don't zoom out. They don't reflect. They don't build leverage. They just get through the next month. The moment you slow down enough to see patterns, the illusion starts to break. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What game am I playing?" That question alone is progress. And finally, the last thing we learned is this: you don't escape the system by working harder until you burn out. You escape it by understanding how it works and choosing where to push back. Not all at once, not perfectly, but intentionally. You don't need to win overnight. You just need to stop losing automatically. That's the shift. And if this video helped you see money differently, even a little bit, thank you for giving me your time. I don't take that lightly. We're going to keep breaking down these systems, one piece at a time, without hype, without shame, and without pretending life is simple. If you want to keep going deeper into this stuff, I'll see you in the next video.